The Boeing 787 Dreamliner cruised at 37,000 feet through crystalline darkness, its passengers lost in the artificial twilight of overnight flight. In seat 15A, Mackenzie Vixen Thorne slept with the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to rest anywhere. In fighter cockpits over hostile territory, in barracks echoing with mortar fire, in boardrooms where million-dollar deals hung in the balance. Her Hermes blanket couldn't hide the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers occasionally twitched toward an imaginary stick. Most passengers saw only another wealthy woman in first class, diamond wedding ring catching cabin light, auburn hair perfectly styled even in sleep. What they couldn't see were the scars mapping her forearms like longitude lines, or the way her breathing automatically adjusted to conserve oxygen, muscle memory from 10,000 hours in military aircraft. They didn't know that beneath her Chanel suit, a faded tattoo marked her as one of the few, the proud, the ones who had written their names across enemy skis in contrails and courage. Captain James Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom at 3:47 hours, shattering the cabin's peaceful hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing multiple system failures and have declared an emergency. I'm going to ask something unusual. If there are any military or commercial pilots aboard, please identify yourselves to the flight crew immediately." Mackenzie's eyes snapped open like radar acquiring target lock. The subtle vibration beneath her feet told a story the captain hadn't shared: engine irregularities, hydraulic pressure dropping, the aircraft fighting against itself. Around her, passengers stirred with the lazy confusion of the suddenly awakened. Some reached for phones, others whispered prayers. A few laughed nervously, assuming this was some elaborate drill. But Mackenzie heard what others missed: the almost imperceptible change in engine harmonics, the way the aircraft's nose wanted to drift left despite the autopilot's corrections. Her wealth came from reading markets, predicting failures before they cascaded. This felt familiar. The same pattern recognition that had made her billions now screamed warnings about metal fatigue, potential catastrophic decompression, the delicate dance of keeping 200 souls aloft when physics itself seemed determined to drag them earthward. She pressed the call button. Flight attendant Lisa Chen appeared within seconds, her professional smile wavering slightly. "How can I help you, miss?" "Thorne, tell the captain he has a combat pilot in 15AA-10 Warthog, 2 tour Afghanistan, 400 combat hours." Mackenzie's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "And tell him whatever's happening up there, lying to the passengers won't help when we're spread across a mountainside." The flight attendant's composure cracked completely. I'll get the captain immediately." As Chen hurried toward the cockpit, Mackenzie felt the familiar electric surge of adrenaline mixing with absolute calm, the paradox of combat readiness. Through her window, stars wheeled in patterns she had navigated by over Kandahar province, when the only things between her and eternity were titanium armor, twin engines, and the unshakable belief that some battles were worth fighting. Tonight, that battle was beginning again. The captain emerged from the cockpit 3 minutes later, his face pale beneath his professional tan. James Morrison had logged 15,000 hours across 3 decades, but tonight he looked like a man staring into an abyss. Behind him trailed First Officer Sarah Kim, her usually perfect composure replaced by barely controlled panic. "Miss Thorne," Morrison's voice carried the strain of a man whose options were rapidly disappearing, "I understand you have military flight experience." Mackenzie unbuckled her seatbelt with practiced efficiency. "Major Mackenzie Thorne, United States Air Force, retired. What's your situation, Captain?" Morrison glanced around the cabin, noting the passengers beginning to stir with genuine concern. He lowered his voice. "We've lost primary hydraulics, backup systems are failing intermittently, and we're getting fault warnings across multiple systems. The aircraft is flyable, but barely. We're 70 minutes from Denver International, but I'm not sure we can maintain controlled flight that long. Avionics. Mackenzie was already moving toward the cockpit, her mind shifting into the cold computational mode that had kept her alive through countless missions. Intermittent failures. GPS is solid, but everything else is cycling on and off. Morrison paused, studying her face. I have to ask, what's your experience with civilian aircraft this size? The question hung in recycled cabin air like smoke from a distant fire. Around them, passengers were beginning to sense something beyond normal turbulence. A child started crying in row 12. A businessman in 8C kept checking his phone signal. The elderly woman across the aisle fingered rosary beads with increasing urgency. Direct experience. Zero, Mackenzie admitted, watching Morrison's face fall. But physics doesn't change based on aircraft type. Lift, drag, thrust, weight, same principles whether you're flying a Warthog or a Dreamliner. The real question is whether you want someone in that cockpit who's landed damaged aircraft under fire, or if you prefer to hope your backup systems start cooperating. Morrison exchanged glances with First Officer Kim, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The decision took 3 seconds, an eternity in aviation emergency protocols, a heartbeat in terms of human judgment. Come forward, Morrison said. But understand, FAA regulations are clear. You can advise, but you can't touch the controls. This is still my aircraft, my responsibility. Mackenzie followed them toward the cockpit, acutely aware of the passengers' stares. To them, she was just another wealthy passenger playing hero. They couldn't know that her last military flight had ended with a wheels-up landing in a sandstorm, her A-10 held together by determination and prayer, her wingman bleeding out in the seat beside her. They couldn't know that every control surface failure, every system's malfunction, every impossible approach was burned into her memory like scars on steel. The cockpit door sealed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded like a cell door closing. Inside the Boeing's nerve center, chaos reigned beneath a veneer of professional calm. Warning lights painted the instrument panel in reds and ambers that pulsed like a mechanical heartbeat. The flight management computer cycled through error messages faster than human eyes could follow. Through the windscreen, dawn painted the horizon in shades of rose and gold, beautiful and utterly indifferent to their crisis. "Show me," Mackenzie said, settling into the observer seat behind Morrison. Kim's fingers danced across the control panel with practiced efficiency. It started about 20 minutes ago. Minor hydraulic pressure warning, then cascade failure. We've lost primary flight controls, thrust reversers are offline, and the landing gear indicators are showing fault codes. Mackenzie studied the displays with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. The pattern was familiar, not mechanical failure, but systematic degradation. Something was eating this aircraft's systems from within, one component at a time. "When did you last update the flight management software?" she asked quietly. Morrison frowned. 3 weeks ago, standard update cycle. Why? Because this isn't random failure. This is progressive systems compromise, probably software-based. Someone or something is turning your aircraft against you, one system at a time. Mackenzie's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had seen enemies adapt, evolve, find new ways to kill American pilots. The implications hung in the cockpit like smoke from burning circuits. "That's impossible," Kim protested. "Commercial aviation software is tested, certified." "So were the systems on our military networks until someone figured out how to turn our own drones against us," Mackenzie interrupted. "Captain, with respect, you're thinking like a civilian pilot. Start thinking like you're under attack." Morrison's hands tightened on the controls as the aircraft shuddered through another system's malfunction. Under attack by whom? "Does it matter right now?" Mackenzie leaned forward, studying the cascade of warning messages. "What matters is that every minute we spend diagnosing the problem is another minute closer to complete systems failure. We need to start planning for manual flight control, because I guarantee you're about to lose everything that makes this aircraft easy to fly." As if summoned by her words, the autopilot disengaged with a harsh warning tone that sent ice through every aviator's veins. Morrison grabbed the controls as the Dreamliner immediately began a subtle left turn, its massive weight fighting against his inputs. Jesus Christ. "No," Mackenzie said calmly, "just physics. And physics can be beaten, but only if you stop hopping the computers will save you and start flying like your life depends on it." Through the cockpit windows, the sunrise painted cloud tops in brilliant gold, indifferent to the drama playing out 7 miles above the earth. The battle for 200 lives had truly begun. Denver International Airport materialized on their displays like a lifeline thrown to drowning sailors, but Mackenzie knew better than to trust appearances. 68 minutes of flying time stretched ahead like a minefield, each minute bringing new system failures, new challenges to overcome. The Dreamliner flew like a wounded bird, Morrison's hands constantly working to compensate for control surfaces that responded sluggishly, unpredictably. Den approach, United 847 Heavy declaring emergency, requesting immediate vectors for approach, Morrison transmitted, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the sweat beading his forehead. United 847, Denver approach, say nature of emergency. Morrison hesitated. How do you explain that your aircraft was dying by degrees, systems failing in patterns that defied normal troubleshooting? Multiple systems failures, partial hydraulic loss, intermittent avionics, requesting emergency equipment standing by. Roger 847, emergency equipment will be standing by. Descend and maintain flight level 240, vectors to follow. Mackenzie watched Morrison work, nodding the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his breathing had shortened under stress. Good pilot, probably excellent under normal circumstances, but this situation was pushing him beyond civilian training parameters. She had seen it before, competent pilots who froze when their aircraft stopped behaving like machines and started behaving like wounded animals. "Captain," she said quietly, "may I suggest we start preparing the passengers? They're going to need to know what's coming." Kim looked back from her instrument scan. "What is coming?" The question hung in recycled air thick with tension and the ozone smell of overheated electronics. Through the windscreen, Colorado's mountains rose like ancient monuments, beautiful and utterly unforgiving to aircraft that fell from grace. Best-case scenario, a very rough landing that scares everyone but kills nobody, Mackenzie said. Worst case, we scatter pieces across 3 counties and make the evening news. Morrison's jaw tightened. There has to be a middle ground. There is, but it requires accepting that this aircraft is no longer going to fly like a Dreamliner. It's going to fly like a brick with wings, and we need to plan accordingly. Mackenzie gestured toward the instrument panel where warning lights continued their relentless cascade. Look at the pattern. Hydraulics, flight controls, landing gear indicators, even cabin pressurization is cycling. Whatever's causing this isn't random, it's systematic. "You keep saying whatever," Kim said. "What do you think is causing this?" Mackenzie had been avoiding that question, partly because the answer seemed too incredible for civilian aviation, partly because it carried implications that went far beyond their immediate crisis. But as she watched another bank of warning lights illuminate, she realized that, incredible or not, patterns didn't lie. "Cyber attack," she said finally. "Someone is systematically taking control of your aircraft systems, probably through the flight management computer. They're not trying to crash us immediately. They're trying to make us crash ourselves through pilot error and system failure." The words landed in the cockpit like artillery rounds, their impact measured in sudden silence and shared glances. "That's," Morrison started. "Impossible. So was hijacking aircraft with box cutters until September 11th. So was turning power grids off with computer viruses until it happened in Ukraine. Mackenzie's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen humanity's capacity for innovation in the service of destruction. Captain, someone turned your aircraft into a weapon pointed at the ground. The question isn't whether that's possible. The question is whether you're going to let them succeed. Outside, morning light painted the world in deceptive beauty, utterly indifferent to their struggle. Morrison's training warred with instinct as the Dreamliner continued its wounded flight toward Denver. Every system they relied upon was becoming unreliable, every safety margin eroding like mountain stone under relentless weather. But beneath the fear, something else was building, the stubborn pride that made pilots believe they could negotiate with physics and win. "All right," he said finally. "Assuming you're right about cyber attack, what do we do about it?" Mackenzie felt a familiar surge of clarity that always came when theoretical problems became practical challenges. We isolate systems, fly manual wherever possible, and prepare for the fact that nothing is going to work the way it's supposed to. Most importantly, we stop trusting the computers to save us. "The passengers need to know," Kim said quietly. "They need to know enough to follow instructions without panicking," Mackenzie corrected. "Full truth gets people killed in emergencies. They need confidence, not terror." Morrison keyed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We're experiencing some technical difficulties that will require an emergency landing in Denver. Please listen carefully to your flight attendants and follow all instructions. I want to assure you that while this situation is serious, we have highly experienced personnel working to ensure your safety." The announcement rippled through the cabin like a stone thrown into still water. Mackenzie could imagine the passenger reactions, some calm, some panicked, most confused. She remembered her own first emergency, flying a training mission when her T-38's engine flamed out over Texas desert. The instructor had been calm, methodical, treating potential death like a checklist item to be completed. "Major Thorne," Morrison said, "I'm going to need you to help me understand what this aircraft can and can't do when the computers stop helping." "First thing, stop calling me Major. That was another life. Right now, I'm just someone who's landed broken aircraft before." Mackenzie moved closer to the instrument panel, studying the degrading readouts. "Second thing, this aircraft weighs about 400,000 pounds loaded. Physics says it wants to fall, and only lift, thrust, and control authority keep it flying. When those start failing, we compensate with altitude, speed management, and planning." "Planning for what?" "Planning for the probability that we're going to touch down in Denver, a lot harder than your passengers paid for." Through the cockpit windows, the Colorado landscape scrolled past like a map of their diminishing options. Beautiful, deadly, and utterly unforgiving to those who fell from grace. The next system failure came without warning, landing gear indicators cycling between extended, retracted, and fault messages like a slot machine displaying their doom in amber lights. Morrison cursed softly, his professional composure finally showing cracks as the Dreamliner's situation deteriorated from serious to critical. "So much for a normal landing," Kim muttered, her fingers flying across diagnostic panels that responded with increasingly erratic readings. Mackenzie studied the gear indicators with the detached interest of someone analyzing an opponent's strategy. Assume the gear won't extend normally. Assume the indicators are lying. Assume we're going to make a belly landing on concrete. "A belly landing," Morrison's voice climbed half an octave, "in a 787 with 200 passengers. "Better than a smoking hole in the ground with 200 corpses," Mackenzie replied flatly. "Captain, you're still thinking like a civilian pilot. Military aviation teaches you that any landing you walk away from is a good landing, and any landing the aircraft can be repaired from is a great landing. Everything else is just ego." The radio crackled with Denver approach control. "United 847, be advised emergency equipment is rolling. Say souls on board and fuel remaining." United 847 has 212 souls on board, approximately 8,000 pounds fuel remaining, Morrison responded, the words feeling like a countdown to destiny. Mackenzie noted the fuel load with professional interest. Enough to maintain powered flight for another 40 minutes, not enough to circle and troubleshoot indefinitely. The mathematics of aviation emergency were always brutal: time, fuel, altitude, and options declining in lockstep toward an inevitable conclusion. "We need to start passenger preparation," she said. "Brace positions, loose objects secured, emergency exits identified. But more importantly, we need to start getting people mentally prepared for impact." Kim looked back from her station. "How do you prepare 200 civilians for a crash landing?" "The same way you prepare anyone for something terrible that might happen. You give them something useful to do and remind them that survival is a choice, not an accident." Mackenzie's voice carried memories of briefing young pilots before their first combat missions, teaching them that fear was acceptable but panic was deadly. "Flight attendants need to understand this isn't going to be textbook. Exits might be blocked, slides might not deploy, emergency lighting might fail. But people can survive incredible impacts if they're prepared and working together." Morrison began typing commands into the flight management computer, trying to coax cooperative behavior from systems that seemed increasingly determined to kill them all. Warning chimes sounded like death knells, each one announcing another step closer to complete systems failure. "Whatever's attacking us is escalating," Mackenzie observed, watching the cascade of malfunctions. "It's like they want us to know we're being hunted." "Why?" Kim asked. "If this is cyber warfare, why not just crash us immediately?" The question hung in cockpit air thick with ozone and fear, while Mackenzie considered possibilities too dark for comfort. Cyber attacks weren't random. They were strategic, designed to achieve specific objectives. Crashing one aircraft killed people but proved nothing. Making that aircraft struggle publicly, fail systemically, crash despite the best efforts of competent pilots, that sent a different message entirely. "Because fear is a weapon too," she said finally. "Crash one plane and it's an accident. Make planes randomly unreliable, make passengers afraid to fly, and you've weaponized the entire aviation system." Outside their windows, Denver International Airport appeared on the horizon like salvation. But Mackenzie had learned long ago that salvation usually came with a price measured in blood and determination. The Dreamliner was dying by degrees, and they had 32 minutes to negotiate its surrender to gravity. Denver International's control tower had transformed into a crisis management center, controllers coordinating emergency response with the precision of air traffic ballet. Mackenzie could visualize the scene: fire trucks positioning along runways, ambulances gathering like mechanical vultures, media helicopters being warned away from what might become the day's leading tragedy. "United 847, Denver Tower, you're cleared for emergency approach runway 34 right. Wind 270 at 15, visibility unlimited. Emergency equipment in position." Morrison acknowledged while fighting the Dreamliner's increasingly erratic behavior. The aircraft wanted to fly left wing low, required constant control inputs to maintain anything resembling straight and level flight. Worse, the flight management computer had begun displaying navigation data that contradicted their actual position, digital hallucinations that could prove fatal during approach. "Ignore the instruments," Mackenzie advised, watching Morrison struggle with contradictory information. "Fly attitude and power just like basic training. The computers are lying to you." "How do you land a 787 without instruments?" Kim asked, her voice tight with controlled panic. "The same way you land anything, by managing energy and altitude until you reach the ground at a survivable speed." Mackenzie moved to the observer position, studying their approach profile. "Captain, recommend we configure for landing early. Get the gear down and locked before we lose the ability to extend it. Morrison nodded, reaching for the landing gear lever. The hydraulic whine of extending gear filled the cockpit, followed immediately by warning chimes as the gear indicators cycled between green, amber, and red like a malevolent traffic light. Gear position unknown, Kim reported. Indicators are cycling, no positive confirmation of lock. Through the cockpit windows, Denver International's runways appeared like concrete lifelines stretching across the Colorado landscape. So close now, yet still requiring delicate negotiation between physics, mechanical systems, and human skill to reach safely. Mackenzie studied the approach path with eyes trained to spot threats invisible to others. "Captain, I recommend we plan for multiple possibilities simultaneously. Normal landing if the gear is down and locked, belly landing if it's not, and emergency evacuation regardless because we can't trust any of our systems." "That's a lot of variables," Morrison said, his hands working constantly to keep the aircraft stable. "Combat flying is all about variables. The pilots who survive are the ones who plan for chaos and adapt when plans fail." Mackenzie's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had navigated similar crises successfully. "Right now, your job is to get this aircraft to the runway in one piece. Everything else is secondary." The passenger address system crackled as Chief Flight Attendant Chen prepared the cabin for impact. Her voice carried professional calm that barely masked underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, tray tables up, and seats in the upright position. Remove all sharp objects from your pockets and place them in the seat back pocket in front of you. If you are able-bodied and sitting near an emergency exit, please identify yourself to a flight attendant." Through the cockpit door, Mackenzie could hear the subtle sounds of passenger anxiety, muffled conversations, crying children, the rustle of people following emergency instructions with the desperate hope that routine could somehow ward off catastrophe. "10 miles out," Morrison announced, beginning the final phase of their troubled approach. United 847 requesting confirmation that emergency equipment is in position. "Emergency equipment standing by, runway 34 right. Winds now 280 at 18, gusting to 25. The wind report sent a chill through the cockpit. Crosswind landings were challenging enough with fully functional aircraft. With compromised systems and unknown gear status, those gusting winds could transform a difficult landing into a fatal one. "We can handle it," Morrison said, though his knuckles were white on the controls. Mackenzie hoped he was right, because in 4 minutes, hope would be replaced by physics, and physics didn't care about their intentions. 5 miles from Denver International, the Dreamliner's final system betrayal began with a soft chime that somehow sounded more ominous than the previous warning tones. The flight management computer screen flickered once, twice, then displayed information so wrong it might have been comic under different circumstances. According to the navigation system, they were flying inverted at 50,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. "Complete avionics failure," Kim announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of their crisis. "We're down to basic flight instruments and radio." Morrison's training took over muscle memory from countless hours of instrument flight. Strip away the computers, the GPS, the digital displays, and flying became elemental: attitude, altitude, airspeed, and the fundamental relationship between aircraft and atmosphere. His hands found the rhythm of manual flight as if awakening from electronic sleep. "Like riding a bicycle," Mackenzie said approvingly. "Trust your hands, trust your eyes, ignore everything that contradicts basic aerodynamics." Through the windscreen, Denver International's runways grew from lines on concrete to actual landing surfaces. Fire trucks positioned along the taxiways like Red Guardians, their crews preparing for scenarios ranging from routine precautionary landing to catastrophic crash recovery. United 847, you're 3 miles from threshold, Cleared to land runway 34 right. Say your approach status. Morrison keyed the radio with one hand while maintaining control with the other. 3 miles out, visual approach, unknown gear status, avionics failure, manual flight control. The tower's response carried subtle tension. Roger 847, emergency equipment advised of your status. Fly stable approach, we have you in sight. 2 miles from touchdown, the crosswind struck like an invisible fist, pushing the Dreamliner sideways toward disaster. Morrison countered with rudder and aileron, feeling the aircraft's sluggish response through controls that seemed to fight his inputs. This was flying stripped to its essence, human will against atmospheric forces, skill against circumstance. Steady, Mackenzie coached, watching the runway alignment shift with each wind gust. Don't chase the center line, fly attitude and let the aircraft settle. In the cabin behind them, 200 passengers experienced the approach as a roller coaster ride they never bought tickets for. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm, checking seatbelts, securing loose objects, preparing for impact scenarios they hoped would never occur. 1 mile, Kim called out, monitoring their descent rate through instruments that might or might not be telling the truth. The runway threshold rushed toward them with the inevitability of destiny. Morrison pulled power back slightly, feeling the Dreamliner settle onto its approach path like a massive bird, grudgingly accepting gravity's authority. Half-mile, sync rate looks good. Gear status, Morrison asked, though they all knew the answer would be unsatisfying. Still unknown, indicators cycling. 300 feet above concrete, Morrison committed to the landing. Whatever happened next was determined by physics, skill, and the grace of machinery that had carried them this far despite systematic betrayal. "Here we go," he said, and pulled the Dreamliner into its final approach. Touchdown came with the grinding roar of rubber meeting concrete at precisely 14:47 local time, the moment when 200 lives hung in balance between successful landing and catastrophic failure. The Dreamliner's weight transferred from wings to landing gear with a series of mechanical groans that spoke of stressed metal and overworked systems. But the gear held, a minor miracle in their string of systematic failures. Morrison applied reverse thrust and wheel brakes, feeling the aircraft's massive momentum fighting against friction and aerodynamics. The runway stretched ahead like a concrete river, emergency vehicles packing their deceleration with red lights flashing against Colorado blue sky. "We're down," Kim announced unnecessarily, her voice mixing relief with lingering tension. But Mackenzie watched their rollout with the practiced eye of someone who knew that successful landings were measured not just in survival, but in the absence of subsequent disasters. Not over yet. Still moving, still burning fuel, still have 200 souls depending on us getting this right. The Dreamliner decelerated through 60 knots, 50, 40 speeds that would have seemed glacial in her, but felt dangerously fast in an aircraft this massive. Morrison worked brake and rudder pedals with the delicate touch of a surgeon, keeping them centered on concrete while physics gradually surrendered to mechanical friction. Ground Control, United 847, is on the deck, requesting emergency vehicles standing by for precautionary evacuation. Roger 847, emergency equipment is positioning. Remain on frequency and advise when ready for passenger evacuation. 30 knots, 20. The fire trucks pulled alongside like mechanical escorts, their crews visible through windshields, ready to respond to scenarios ranging from routine emergency to catastrophic fire. 10 knots, 5. The Dreamliner settled to a stop on Denver International's runway 34 right, its journey from crisis to salvation measured in heartbeats, skill, and the fundamental physics that governed all flight. For a moment, the cockpit held perfect silence, the absence of engine noise, warning chimes, and the constant background hum of electronic systems struggling against systematic sabotage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced over the passenger address system, his voice carrying exhaustion and profound relief. "Welcome to Denver International Airport. Please remain seated while we coordinate with emergency personnel for a precautionary evacuation." Through the cockpit windows, Mackenzie watched emergency crews position their equipment with practiced efficiency. Foam trucks, ambulances, fire suppression systems, the full arsenal of aviation emergency response deployed against possibilities that had been avoided through skill, luck, and determination. "Not bad for a civilian pilot," she said, offering Morrison the highest compliment in her vocabulary. He managed a tired smile. Not bad for someone who supposedly knew nothing about large aircraft. Kim was already running post-landing checklists, securing systems that might still pose fire or explosion hazards. So what happens now? FAA investigation, NTSB, congressional hearings about cybersecurity in aviation. Mackenzie considered the question while watching Denver International's emergency response unfold around them. Their crisis was ending, but the implications were just beginning. If her suspicions about systematic cyber attack were correct, this incident represented something far more dangerous than mechanical failure. It represented warfare conducted in the digital shadows of civilian aviation. "Now we make sure this doesn't happen to the next aircraft," she said finally. "Because whoever did this just proved that commercial aviation is vulnerable in ways we never imagined." Outside, the first passenger evacuation slides deployed with the distinctive hiss of compressed air meeting nylon fabric, beginning the process of returning 200 souls safely to Earth. The evacuation proceeded with textbook efficiency, passengers sliding down inflatable chutes onto Denver International's concrete with expressions ranging from relief to exhilaration to simple bewilderment. Emergency medical teams moved among them with practiced triage skills, identifying those needing immediate attention while ensuring that everyone was accounted for and safely away from the aircraft. Mackenzie remained in the cockpit while Morrison and Kim completed shutdown procedures, watching the organized chaos of emergency response through windows that had framed their crisis from beginning to resolution. Fire crews maintained foam cannons at ready positions, ambulances processed minor injuries, and airport authority personnel began the complex choreography of incident investigation. "Major sorry, Ms. Thorne," Morrison said, exhaustion evident in every syllable. "I don't know how to thank you properly for what you did up here." "Don't thank me yet," Mackenzie replied, studying the scene outside with growing concern. "Captain, look at that aircraft." Morrison followed her gaze to where maintenance personnel were conducting preliminary inspections of the Dreamliner's exterior. Their body language spoke of confusion, animated discussions, frequent pointing at components that should have been obviously damaged, but appeared frustratingly normal. "What am I looking at? An aircraft that should show obvious signs of the system's failures we experienced, but apparently doesn't." Mackenzie's voice carried the flat certainty of someone recognizing patterns invisible to others. "Captain, I think we just survived something that officially never happened." Kim looked up from her shutdown checklist. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if this was a cyber attack designed to test aviation vulnerabilities, the attackers just got exactly the data they wanted. They learned how civilian flight crews respond to systematic failures, how long it takes emergency services to respond, how passengers behave during crisis." Mackenzie moved toward the cockpit door, preparing to join the evacuation. More importantly, they learned that their attack methods work. The implications hung in recycled cockpit air like smoke from invisible fires. If one aircraft could be systematically compromised through digital attack, then every aircraft equipped with similar systems was potentially vulnerable. Commercial aviation had evolved into a network of interconnected computers that happened to fly, and networks could be invaded, corrupted, turned against their users. "So what happens next?" Morrison asked. "Next, you become heroes for saving 200 lives in a miraculous emergency landing," Mackenzie said, gathering her personal items. "And I become a paranoid former military pilot whose theories about cyber warfare sound like conspiracy fiction. But you'll keep investigating." It wasn't really a question. Morrison had spent 3 hours watching Mackenzie analyze their crisis with the methodical intensity of someone who treated mysteries as problems to be solved rather than events to be survived. That kind of mind didn't simply walk away from unanswered questions. "Someone just turned a commercial airliner into a flying laboratory with 200 innocent people as test subjects," Mackenzie said. "Yes, Captain, I'll keep investigating, because the next test might not end with everyone walking away." She opened the cockpit door, preparing to join the river of passengers flowing toward safety and the beginning of whatever came after survival. Behind her, Morrison and Kim continued their shutdown procedures, securing systems that had carried them through crisis and depositing them safely into the realm of incident reports, investigation boards, and questions that might never receive satisfactory answers. Outside Denver International's terminal windows, the Dreamliner sat surrounded by emergency vehicles, looking deceptively normal in afternoon sunlight. To casual observers, it was simply another aircraft that had experienced routine mechanical difficulties and landed safely. They couldn't see the digital ghosts that had haunted its systems, couldn't know how close 200 souls had come to becoming statistics in aviation's ongoing war between human skill and mechanical complexity. But Mackenzie knew, and knowing changed everything. 3 hours after touchdown, Mackenzie sat in Denver International's executive lounge, her Hermes suit replaced by airport gift shop clothing that made her look like an ordinary traveler rather than a billionaire who had just helped save 200 lives. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched her former aircraft being towed toward maintenance hangars, where teams of technicians would begin the complex process of determining what had gone wrong. What they would find, she suspected, was absolutely nothing. Her phone buzzed with the first of what would become dozens of interview requests: CNN, Fox News, aviation magazines, podcasts dedicated to air disaster analysis. The story was already metastasizing across social media. Billionaire pilot saves flight. Emergency landing at Denver International. Hero in first class. None of them would capture the truth, because the truth was too complex for sound bites and too dangerous for comfortable assumptions about aviation security. "Ms. Thorne," a voice interrupted her brooding contemplation of consequences and incomplete victories. She turned to find Agent Sarah Walsh, FBI, her credentials displayed with the weary professionalism of someone whose Tuesday had just become infinitely more complicated. Behind her stood a younger man in an ill-fitting suit who radiated the particular tension of someone trying to look more competent than he felt. "I'm Agent Walsh, FBI Cyber Crimes Division. This is Agent Martinez from our Denver field office. We understand you were instrumental in the successful emergency landing of United Flight 847. Mackenzie studied Walsh's face, nodding the intelligence behind tired eyes, the careful way she phrased questions to elicit maximum information, while revealing nothing about federal interest in what should have been a routine aviation incident. "I provided technical advice to the flight crew," Mackenzie said carefully. "Captain Morrison deserves credit for an excellent job under difficult circumstances." "Technical advice based on your military aviation experience." "Among other things." Walsh settled into the adjacent chair with practiced ease, while Martinez positioned himself strategically to observe both the conversation and potential escape routes, standard interview positioning that confirmed Mackenzie's suspicions about federal interest in their little adventure. "Ms. Thorne, Our preliminary investigation suggests that United 847 experienced an unusual pattern of systems failures, multiple redundant systems failing in sequence, without obvious mechanical cause. Walsh's voice carried.